This special meeting of the Judson Board of Trustees is hereby called to order at 6:30 p.m. I am very pleased that you have taken time to join us this evening. As the Judson Board of Trustees, we are here to set goals and policies and oversee the management of the district. We are responsible for approving budgets, contracts, personnel appointments, and to listen to reports from the superintendent. We are not here to make administrative or management decisions pertaining to the daily operations of the district. This is the responsibility of the superintendent. In compliance with the State Government Code on Open Meetings, tonight's agenda has been appropriately posted. This is a meeting in public, not a meeting of the public. As our guest, you are welcome to observe and listen. These proceedings are being video and audio recorded and will become part of Judson's permanent legal record. In order that the tape adequately reflects these proceedings, please silence your mobile devices and refrain from talking while others are speaking. Since it is legally mandated that these proceedings are recorded accurately, I may have to ask for order periodically should I notice that disruptions are interfering with our recording capabilities. Once again, I extend to each of you a sincere welcome from the entire school board. Thank you for your interest in Judson ISD. We have established a quorum and I will call roll. Mr. LaFoyle.
Present.
Ms. Canoyer.
Present.
Mr. Macias.
Present.
Ms. Rodriguez.
Present.
Ms. Pashal.
Present.
And I am Melinda Salinas, and we also have our superintendent, Dr. Carl Montoya.
Present.
Thank you. And for the record, Ms. Eaton is not present at this time. We will begin with item number 2, fiscal year 2018 budget discussion. 2A, TASB compensation study presentation.
Okay, Madam President, members of the board, again, the purpose of this special board meeting is to review a study that was done by TASB that we hired to do a compensation study for the district, and you will also receive budget information from Mr. Elizondo, our CFO. And again, obviously, this is part of a process that will take at least a couple of more meetings. We're also waiting on to see basically what the state sends us in terms of specific funding source amounts. So that's still up in the air for all districts, not just Judson. But at this time, I'll turn it over to Mr. Elizondo.
Thank you, Dr. Montoya. Board members, at this time, Ms. Cindy Clegg with TASB is going to do her presentation on the compensation study that they've done for the school district.
Consultant here tonight for Luz Cadena, who had a family wedding that she needed to go to. And I was here a few weeks ago, it seems like, and talked to you gave you a status report at that time about 2 models for teacher pay and the results of our market analysis. And so tonight, I'm going to bring you, we have finished all of our analysis, all the different pay groups that you have. We have developed 3 different models that we want to talk to you about and some miscellaneous recommendations. This process was part of what every district has to periodically go through on a regular basis to maintain a market competitive pay plan. And that means going back into your peer group, looking at the market benchmarks, how your pay plans align, where people are positioned, and make adjustments to put yourself where you want to be. And that's what our efforts have been. We've provided a lot of detail to the administration, had several review meetings with them where Ms. Cadena has done that. So I'm going to keep it kind of at a high level for the board tonight. I'm going to remind you about the teachers because we have done a little more work on that since I was here last time. And to remind you that when we talk about the market, this is the peer group that we use. These are your peer districts. But when it comes to the administrative pay group, we don't include Northeast, Northside, and San Antonio because they are so much larger. And so when you look at district administrators, we try to look at more comparable size organizations. So job markets are mainly geographic, and these were included with teachers and your hourly employees and other professionals like counselors, therapists. We looked at the whole group. So back, just to remind you about a few things about teachers before you, just some background that will perhaps influence decision making. This pie chart shows you the new teachers, well, for all of those on the teacher salary schedule, teachers, librarians, and nurses, that were newly hired for this school year. This is the distribution of the experience. So you can see that 40% of the new hires were beginners, 29% had 5 years or less, 1 to 5 years, and then the rest had from 6 to 16 plus years. This is a very common pattern in larger districts that we see. It's very positive that you are able to draw in teachers that have more than 5 years of experience, but those aren't the teachers that move around very much. Most of the new hires and the teachers you replace are going to be the younger or beginning teachers. This is also a reflection, this pattern is very similar to how your entire teaching staff is distributed in terms of experience. So you look at salary schedules, it makes a big difference in terms of the cost impact of our models and what kind of strategies we recommend. So about half of your teachers, a little more than half, are in the 1 to 10 year experience range on your salary schedule. And you have very few teachers that are beyond 20 years. And the good news about that is you're not facing an onslaught of a lot of retirements. But you do have to look at staying competitive in those early years. So those are the demographics. The market comparison, this graph shows you kind of what your schedule looks like. You are, much closer at the bottom, that 0 years. You can see the dark line is the market median, and the light blue line on the bottom is Judson ISD. So you're very close to the market median in starting salary, and then the gaps gets bigger and bigger. So it's a fairly big gap at 5 years, even bigger at 10 years, and so forth. So our models are recommended to help you narrow that gap and get more in a competitive position across the board for all teachers. This is just the detail behind that graph. That red arrow between South San Antonio and Schertz shows you where your starting salary ranks. Now, if you look at the distribution of teacher starting salaries, which is a very competitive point. Teacher starting salaries have been going up faster than any other part of the schedule for quite a few years now. You're very close to the median, and there's quite a compressed group. There's only like $1,000 difference between the bulk of those districts. The median is right there above South San Antonio. And then Southwest is kind of, way out there. But one of the things that I also want you to look at, the bottom 2 rows are the green row that says median, we're comparing that to the row above it that says Judson, and you can see the actual amount of the gap there at the bottom, dollar difference and percent value. But one of the other things that we need to look at, and Ms. Cadena has made some recommendations for, is you have the problem that happens when you raise starting salaries faster than anything else to keep up. You have very little spread between a beginning teacher and a 5-year teacher. And so one of the things, there's just $600, and I'm sure we'd all agree there's a lot more value difference between a teacher with 5 years and one who's first in the classroom. So some of the strategy recommendations we're bringing to you are to alleviate the compression, to create a little more spread in the bottom of these ranges, to acknowledge time on the job and experience that people have. So that's the teacher market comparison in terms of salary schedules. That's the bulk of teacher pay. We also look at stipends. And I showed you this before. You look pretty good with stipends. What you pay in critical shortage areas is pretty competitive. The thing I would point out to you, because there is a recommendation coming up about that, the subject area master's degrees, there's only 3 out of 11 in your peer group that pay more for a subject area master's, but I would characterize that as an emerging trend. And it's based on some pretty solid research that's been widely publicized that shows that the only master's degree that has been shown to have any impact on effective teaching skills in the classroom are master's degree that have a content connection to what's being taught. Just general master's degrees out of field that are in administration or unrelated don't. That's very much kind of a local value issue, but Ms. Cadena did have a recommendation about that. The other one that is a trend that I'll bring up again, if you look at special education, one of the things Judson does is pay $2,000 for any special education certified teacher, regardless of the type of assignment. The practice in the field, the prevalent trend in the market is to either pay more or pay only for teachers who are in the most challenging assignments. We call them self-contained teachers. The special ed teachers who deal with the behavioral issues, the life skills needs, those. And so there's actually only 4 out of your group of 11 that pay anything for special ed general resource, and those pay less than they would pay a self-contained teacher. So Ms. Cadena has a recommendation related to that as well. And I'm going to go through all those recommendations together in just a moment. Teacher incentives, this looks fine. We have no recommendations about that. Your department chairs and mentor teacher stipends are very much in line with your peer group. So just to summarize the key findings here, and I mentioned this before, and I'm sure you're painfully aware that you were not able to provide a pay increase to employees last year. And the result of that has been that you've lost some ground in your market position in all of your groups. What happened this year in your peer group is that teachers got on average 2%, administrative professional got 2%, and then the hourly non-exempts, clerical and auxiliary, got about 2.6%. That's just the list of districts that we looked at the beginning. This year, we did a poll in April asking districts generally what they thought they were going to be budgeting for pay raises, and quite honestly, in April, nobody really knows. But the response we got from most respondents was 2 to 2.5%. I don't know what the San Antonio market is going to be, but I think we can pretty much assume there will be raises given probably by most of your peer groups of some amount. So, as I already said that, you're kind of below at all levels. Your most competitive point is beginning, and then the gap gets wider from there. And I've already gone over this. So let me go to our recommendations for teachers. We've added another model. So when I was here last time, we looked at, there were 2 different models for teacher pay. We've done another more aggressive model to position you higher, and that will be Model 3. So basically, in all these groups, you think about Model 1's kind of the middle cost model of 3% general pay increase is the starting point. Model 2 is the least expensive at 2%, and Model 3, the new Model 3, would be the most expensive. So in Model 1, the salary schedule we've modeled would increase your teaching starting salary to $51,500. That would put you in a good position in your group. All of your teachers would get a 3% general pay increase based on market average, like we would do for all the other groups as well. So that would equal $1,650. Your 10-month teachers would get a $1,650 annual pay increase under Model 1. And then there are additional adjustments to improve your market competitiveness down the line. And to show you, this is a very busy slide, I know, but just to kind of illustrate the differences, this is actually the worksheet Ms. Cadena used to develop the models. And if you look, the first row is what you pay now. You read across the rows to see what is added to the teacher salary to yield the new salary. So if you, I don't think you can see my blinker on your screens, I guess, but if you look at row year one, for example, a teacher currently makes $50,150. You see there's no difference there between a beginning and a one-year teacher. They would get a general pay increase of $1,650. At this point, they would get an additional $150 adjustment. Next year, those teachers would have 2 years of experience and their salary would be $51,950. So the end product are these last two columns here that show the 17-18 salary with adjusted experience. Now, the reason the adjustments, the additional adjustments are added, there's two things we're trying to accomplish. One is if you look at the experience differential column, that column on the far right, that is the difference in pay between each year of experience. So to alleviate compression, and it's an expensive proposition, but to get a little more spread in there, we have to add more dollars to it. The other thing to look at is the column that says general market median compare after. Those little boxes next to 0, 5, 10, those are current market salaries. Those should be expected to go up next year. That's today's market. And the compare before column shows where you are right now. The compare after column shows you where you would be next year based on Model 1. So essentially, Model 1 would bring you would get a little edge on starting pay, and it would bring you up to today's teacher pay market. Model 2 is less expensive. We still increase the teacher starting salary, but instead of $51,500, it's $51,50. Instead of $1,650, we apply a 2% general pay increase, which would be $1,100. So that's the difference in teacher pay raises, $1,600 to $1,100. And then again, additional adjustments for market competitiveness. So this is what that schedule would look like. And again, the pattern is not that different. The numbers are lower. And when you look at the compare after column, that's the critical thing, it doesn't bring you quite all the way up to today's market. And then the last model, this is the new one. This is the very aggressive and of course, therefore very costly model. Model 3 would increase your teacher starting salary to $52,150. That would get you up very high in the ranking of your peer group for teacher starting pay. In this model, we give all continuing teachers, we start with a 4.5% general pay increase. That's kind of making up for lost ground. The 2% most districts gave last year, and then another 2.5% that we're thinking will be close to market movement for next year. That would give all teachers a $2,500 pay increase, and then we add necessary adjustments. So Model 3, and I will get to the cost, we're going to save the mystery for the end, keep the suspense. So the result of Model 3, you can see over here on the end. This would get you up to 3 to 4% above today's market. And so we're thinking, probably next year, you'd have an edge of maybe about 2% over your peer group. So Model 3 is to gain some ground in the marketplace, kind of make up for lost time, and it's a very generous model. The other recommendations that Ms. Cadena put in her report, one was to consider adding the $2,500 stipend to teachers with a master's degree in their subject area. Again, I would characterize this as a soft recommendation. We don't even have a cost estimate for this because we don't have that kind of data. It's really just something to be aware of and consider as an emerging trend. Her other recommendation related to stipends was to keep the $2,000 stipend that you have now for special ed self-contained, but to differentiate between general resource and self-contained by dropping to a $1,000 stipend for the general resource teachers. Now that doesn't mean taking anything away, because those who have been in the district would retain that. We always would recommend grandfathering people who have already earned and been granted that. But for new teachers coming into the district in the future, or teachers who go into special ed in the future at some effective date in time, like beginning with next year, you would pay less for general resource than you do for self-contained. So that basically sums up the teachers. The other non-teacher pay groups, I'm going to move into that now and kind of show you the big picture. This table shows you the market position. We look at benchmarking all the jobs that we can match to survey data reliably. And that middle column that says incumbents pay compared to local market, that's how your current employees in these positions compare overall, the whole group. We also look at your pay range structures to see what kind of adjustments need to be made to keep your pay ranges, those guidelines that give you the parameters of what is proper pay for each job, how well aligned those are. So you can see here with district administration, we were able to benchmark 22 positions in that group, and overall your employees are paid 97% of market. That's very similar to the teacher position that you have. And the midpoints were kind of right on the money. They all need some adjustment just to stay up to date, and because there will be market inflation, we always recommend minor adjustments in pay ranges. Campus administration, we benchmarked 10 jobs there. These are your assistant principals and principals. They were at 95%, so a little lower position than the teachers in that group. Professional support, 20 jobs, 97%. Technology, 11 jobs are at 98%. That was the strongest group. And then your three hourly non-exempts, clerical, instructional support aides, and auxiliary are at 93 or 94%. So those are the lowest groups. You know, they're all within 10%, and that's good, but, you know, as I said, there's been some slippage. One thing about the non-exempt groups to keep in mind, we typically see their position being a little lower than professional administrative because of turnover. You just generally have more turnover in low-wage jobs, and most of the lower-wage jobs are in those groups. So our recommendations for the non-teacher groups are, again, to adjust all the pay structures to improve alignment with the market. That's just basic maintenance for market inflation. And those are the different pay groups that you have listed there in bullets. I would have you note that these adjustments would bring your minimum wage, your minimum entry wage in your auxiliary group from $9.66 an hour up to $10.25 an hour, which would bring Judson's minimum wage more in line with your peer group districts. And that's generally considered by Baylor economics people who calculate these things, what is a living wage for Texas. So the models that we have, and as always, and as your peer group does, the pay increases, general pay increases are based on the market rate or the midpoint in these pay plans. Model 1 is 3% general pay increase for every employee group. Model 2 is 2% general pay increase for every employee group. And Model 3 is the 4.5% for teachers and 3% for the other groups. And that's just because we knew it would just be unwieldy if we came in and modeled 4.5% for everybody. So we didn't even go there. But this is a modeling exercise. We have no idea what your budget's going to look like. And we can do models as many as Mr. Elizondo wants to see until we hit the right number. So, other recommendations, we did look at pay equity. One of the concerns was internal pay equity and a problem that's called compression. And that's when, like with the teacher example, where you have a 5-year and a beginner basically paid almost the same thing. Well, that problem occurred in some of the other groups where there just was not enough value added for time in the job, and new hires and experienced people were paid too close together. Or in some cases with principals and with the campus administrators, the issue was that years in the job, things had just kind of weren't really lined up for years in the position. And so Ms. Cadena went through and tried to correct that, studied that issue, and tried to line people up where they should be for their time in the job. And we got data on, for campus administrators and particularly, how many years of job experience in the position people had. So in addition to the general pay increase, our standard recommendations here would be always ensure that employees are paid at least the minimum of the pay range. That's like the lowest pay standard for the job. So if the general pay increase didn't get them to the adjusted minimum, we would add whatever was necessary to make sure nobody was paid below that. They'd be paid at least what a new hire would be making coming in. To ensure, the other thing we did was ensure that pay levels for the career pathway were in line with the teacher proposal. Now, this is going to depend very much on what model you decide to adopt with teachers, but essentially we run a check on the basis of daily rates against certified educators that require teaching experience to qualify for the jobs. So that's going to be your counselors, your instructional coaches, assistant principals, to make sure that none of those jobs would fall below the level that a teacher would be paid for the same experience. So we call those teacher pay equity adjustments. And in this case, there were 62 people that needed an added adjustment to, we actually positioned them like 1.5% above on a daily rate. Those were all counselors and curriculum specialists that needed the teacher pay equity. And then the other thing I mentioned that Ms. Cadena studied was improving peer-to-peer equity, people who have the same job assignment, to look at how their pay compares based on their time in the job. And with assistant principals and principals, there were 33 employees who needed some extra adjustment to improve internal equity based on their job experience. For your non-exempt, these are employees who are very compressed. We also tried to alleviate compression by spreading them out based on their experience in the district up to the midpoint. We did not adjust anybody above market rates, but we basically apply a scale so that if they had 20 years in the district and they still were not at midpoint or market, we would spread them out so that it's basically a placement scale that would spread 20 years up to the midpoint. And that will alleviate a lot of the internal equity issues that have been experienced. So, drum roll, the cost estimates, again, based on the snapshot of employees we downloaded when we started the project. This is the 3%. I called this the medium version. You can see the first column says general pay increase, and that's what the 3% general pay increase would cost for each group. And you can see down at the bottom, so that's $4.3 million, and that comes out about 3.2% of what you currently spend on this group of employees. The adjustments column are all the big ticket item on the adjustments column are those teacher schedule adjustments. That's $500,000 there. And all of the other groups, The adjustments I just mentioned to you to alleviate compression and provide more internal equity, that's what the adjustment column represents. That's another $1 million. So Model 1 would be close to $5.5 million, or a 4% overall increase in current spending. Model 2, this is the least expensive model we have done so far. The general pay increase would be almost $3 million, 2.2%. The adjustments would still be another $1 million, no matter how you cut it. To make those kind of corrective adjustments is going to cost almost another %. So this model would be $4 million, 3.1% increase in spending. And then last, but certainly not the least, this is the 4.5% for teachers, 3% for everybody else. General pay increase, because of the teacher model, is $5.7 million, 4.3% increase in current spending. The adjustments here, almost $3 million, and the total package here would be almost $8.7 million, or a 6.4% overall increase. I know that is a pricey package, but it is the one that will get you where you want to be. So that is where we're at, and those are the 3 models we've developed, and I'm going to stop there and see if you have any questions.
Can you go back to the slide right before, please? Thank you.
Thank you again. It does seem like you were here yesterday, or just a few weeks ago.
Yes.
And I appreciated that presentation. I wondered how difficult would it be to incorporate an increase, and I guess before you answer, let me ask something to Dr. Montoya first. Have we identified where our highest turnover rate is? I remember we had some discussions about identifying where our turnover was occurring. At what year, or has that been identified?
I think generically it is, as she said, the lower, the younger group coming in, and I don't have the numbers in front of me, but in a generic way, that's been the group. And then, of course, we have on the high end a few people retiring and that type of thing.
So if I were to guess, then, based on one of these slides that talked about where we are as a district compared to what some of the local market median, years 5 through 10, even through 15, have a large disparity. We're close at the beginning, but we're really far apart. I still would like to look at the model. I like the 4.5 or the 4% increase, but in trying to be strategic, looking at that specific demographic between 5 and 15 years, if we can narrow that even closer to where we see the highest turnover rate, that's where we would start. And then, of course, kind of have a tiered approach. 0 through 5 would maybe be 2% in terms of an increase. That demographic, and I'll just for the sake of having a number now, say 5 years is where we are losing teachers, all the way to 10 years or 15. We have the strongest level of increase there, and then we get to 15 plus, we can go down a little bit. That model is of interest to me, and I don't know what that might cost. Would it be difficult to get that type of data?
No, I mean, now that we have all this set up, we can run all the models you want. We don't have that data either. Like, turnover is such a thing. It's the questions would be whether your turnover's higher than normal turnover, because some turnover is normal and good. So if you really have a turnover, if you really have higher than average turnover, And like you said, where it is occurring, but even more importantly, why it is occurring.
Well,
'Cause-
certainly I would ask that
Yes.
too.
And yes, we can, so the Model 3 that Ms. Cadena designed has you at basically brings you up to 4% above today's market across the board, or certainly up through about year 15 or 20. So that could be, the reason I showed you that slide before, half your teachers are under 10 years, and so being more aggressive in the lower end will cost more because you have so many teachers positioned there. But yes, we can position you wherever you.
And I'll be honest, I don't know what the final dollar amount on something like that would look like. And I guess what I want to avoid is I love that the adjustments that you've included with the annual increases will put us more in line with the market. But every other ISD is going to be increasing their salary too, so that disparity will still open up. And I don't want to just throw money hoping that, we're competitive. I really want to implore some strategic thought into identifying where we really need to put some resources in.
Yeah.
And so seeing a model like that will help start to say, okay, if years 7 through 11, highest turnover, but yet the most experienced teachers are leaving, we need to do something that's above and beyond, in my opinion, and we have an opportunity to do that. So that's all that I would ask Dr. Montoya to follow up to give us that opportunity to see what it would cost.
One of the things I would just like to add in here to call your attention, what we're dealing with, I want to find a teacher model here. There is so much compression, and this is not just Judson, this is going on all over the state because of the pressure on teacher starting salaries. So in this Model 3, you have a little more spread. This shows you the experience increments between years of experience, that far column on the right. So yes, there could be a little more manipulation of this particular model, but when you get into some of these lower cost ones, there's still very little experience spread. There's still like $150 difference between each year from 1 to almost up to 10. So those things are the things we have to balance. The short answer is yes, but we have to continue to acknowledge experience as well.
And there's not to say that our teachers are not all equal, but certainly experienced teachers have a lot of value. And one of the things that I would ask my colleagues to consider as well is I did like the recommendation for the master's stipend. We will need more teachers in this district with master's degrees. And so if we have a demographic like the 0 to 5 that probably just got out of school and they want to start working, if we develop a pilot program that helps them get their master's degree, we might not be able to compensate them, but we can give them another benefit of getting their master's. It's in professional development. So it doesn't necessarily need to show up on the compensation scale if we can find other added value items for these teachers, but we can kind of pilot that type of program. That's truly what I'm looking for. And again, that 2,500 you said, I remember you mentioning it's looking like a trend statewide where they're starting to increase that stipend for master's degrees?
Yes, after that research, well, like I said, there's only 3 in your market group, but statewide, that's something that we see growing. It's like there's 3 that pay the master's, the subject area stipend, 4 that pay the special ed general resource. One's increasing and one's declining. Those are the market trends that we've been following.
Well, we have an opportunity at Judson, since we are now an early college high school district wide, to really take a position that is far ahead of other ISDs that may consider this. We want to take strategic advantage in that capacity. So looking at that would be possibly another benefit.
Dr. Montoya, may I
Yes.
ask Mr. Elizondo a question?
Yes, go ahead.
Mr. Elizondo, I know several months back the board approved incentive, a retention incentive. Can you give me that total? How much that's going to cost us?
The number that we
approximately?
included in the budget for planning purposes right now is $1.8 million in the general operating fund. And I think it's like 100 or 150 in child nutrition, but the one we need to focus on mostly is the one in the general fund for 1.8 million.
1.8 million, okay. And so as we consider employee raises, then I think maybe we can discuss as a board, and maybe not today, but we need to think about then, are we going to do the raise and the one-time incentive, or could we look at a heftier raise and not do the incentive? Because if I'm a teacher and employee, I'd rather have the raise because we have to sustain that every year versus the one-time. So just something to think about.
And just a quick comment, obviously, this type of models are recurring expenses. You know, it's not a one-time deal, and I think you hit it, Dr. Salinas, that you're talking every year, it's a recurring expense. The other piece to this, and I guess maybe this is a question, comment to Mr. Elizondo, we would have to probably look at fund balance, right? Is that correct?
Yes, sir, and I'll cover that in a few minutes with the board, but the way the budget is shaping up right now, anything we're going to do is going to be coming out of fund balance.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. And Mr. Elizondo, you'll continue with the other piece of the presentation.
I don't want to.
Hey, Dr. Montoya, when would we be able to get that updated report from TASB?
I don't know, Mr. Elizondo, maybe you could ask our
Sure, I
TASB
think,
representative.
Just give them a few days, or, by the middle of next week, we should have some data.
So you think in a few days, ma'am, that we could have that maybe next week, within a few days?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So that-
Thank you. Good luck with the
She's leaving before y'all start throwing tomatoes at me. Before I start, I was going to say that the reason I said I didn't want to is, we've had some difficult times preparing budgets for the school district in the past. And I'm going to say that this is one of those years where it's been really stressful for everybody. We've had a lot of serious discussions, a lot of passionate discussions, because this is really, we're having difficulties with our funds. The last time I remember we had these kind of discussions was back in the 08, 09, 010 school year, when we were cutting programs and people left and right because the state had cut our funding. Well, the state's not claiming to be cutting our funding right now, and everybody says the economy is doing great, but as I'm going to show you in a few minutes, we're having some serious problems with our budgets, and we're not alone. As I'll go through it, I'll explain to you a little conversation that I had with one of our neighboring districts and kind of some of the situations they're going through, so that hopefully it'll put it all in perspective. I'm going to go ahead and cover this, and I'll kind of add some of that as we're going through, but I'm going to start discussing the general operating fund. And just to give you some premises that we're using to develop the budget, this year, and I covered some of these with y'all last year, last time we met, I'm just going to update you a little bit on some of these estimates that we've run. But the appraisal district does an appraisal every year of all the values in the school districts. And for this year, that estimated taxable value on top, that's what they're saying that we're going to end up with approximately about $8.7 billion worth of value in our district. Last year at this time, they said our value was at $7.9 billion. So you can see it's grown pretty significantly. The collection rate that we use, and this is the tax rate collection rate that we use for budget purposes, and we do better than this, but just to make sure that we're safe in what we're projecting, we use a 98% collection rate. Our true collection rate there's a collection rate for current taxes, and there's a collection rate overall when you're adding the delinquent taxes from the prior years. The current rate collections is closer to 99%, but it's never going to reach 100 because you're going to have people that are not going to pay their taxes this year. They're going to wait and pay them in later years. So it's never going to really be able to be 100%. We always forecast 100 for when Ms. Gangover runs some of her reports, but it never reaches that, because that is the goal, obviously. The estimated ADA that we're using right now for next year is 22,100 students. I think the board members that were here last year recall that we lost students last year, and so I'm waiting for the final PEIMS numbers for this school year. I'm being told that hopefully by Tuesday at the latest, I should have those, so that 22,100 can be more of a realistic forecast for next year, because I'm really using the data from last year and what we thought we saw in enrollment increases for this current school year to forecast that. But once I have those final PEMS numbers for 16-17, I can do a better job of pinpointing that number. Although I will say that we never know when students are going to leave our district, and if they're going to leave to a charter school or else we just don't know that. They don't come ask us. So we just know when they don't show up anymore. So last year we used 22,000. As you can see, it's not very much of a difference, just 100 in ADA increase. The attendance rate that I use for our budget is 94.6%. That's for student attendance. I think for this 2016-17, I was told today that we were reaching at like a little over 95%. So that's a little bit better. That means we get a little bit more state funding when that happens. Well, I take that back. It's better because our students are in class more. However, it doesn't really have an impact on ADA necessarily. It just depends on how many students we have total in membership, because if our total kids decrease, even though if we have more of them showing up more often, our total number of students have still decreased, and which means we get less state funds if that happens. And the tax rate that we currently have is $1.04 per $100 taxable value. That's for the general operating fund. We do have, as a school district, the ability to raise that rate up to $1.17, but to do that, we have to ask for voter approval. And some of y'all have maybe heard of things that are called tax ratification elections that school districts have. And I promised you, and we're still working on that, to try to get you all the districts in Bexar County and where they're at. But I know for a fact that the majority of them are at $1.04. There may be 2 or 3 that have gone to their voters and asked for the additional 13 cents to be $1.17. The reason they do that is because obviously it creates more revenue locally, but it also generates what they call the golden pennies from the state. And so in the event that we were to consider that, the last time we looked, which was probably 3 years ago, it was a revenue increase to the district of about $5 million, approximately. And I'm going to keep going, but if y'all have any questions, please feel free to interrupt as I go through. This is the same information that was in your board book, except we put it in a little bit of a PowerPoint so we could share it with the public. The local revenue for the general operating fund, if you'll concentrate on the column, says the 2017-2018 budget. It shows you that for current year taxes, we're forecasting $89.5 million. Now that's an increase of about $8.7 million compared to the last year. And that goes back to what I said a minute ago about our taxable value increasing from like $7 billion to $8 billion plus. So that's what affects that. Those are dollars that are being paid by our local taxpayers. The next row down where it talks about delinquent taxes, that's what I was mentioning a minute ago, that not everybody pays them in the year due. Some of them wait till the next year, so there's a little bit difference there. And that number changes a little bit here and there, so we are showing a little bit of a decrease there of about $200,000 because we have had our taxpayers paying more on time, which means that the delinquent rolls get a little smaller, so we collect less taxes in future years for that. Principal and interest are payments that our taxpayers have to pay as well. If they don't pay on time, that number stays pretty much the same. Athletics, we're estimating about the same thing. Tuition, about the same thing as last year. The interest, investment interest, there was a time when if y'all can remember the interest rates when they were like at 4% and 5%, that line item was over $1 million that we used to generate in interest revenue. Now, as you can see, we're down to $50,000, $30,000. It is getting better, but we have a long way to go before it gets to where we're back to the $1 million range. As y'all know, we do receive E-rate discounts as well, and we receive discounts of about $560,000, and those are discounts that we receive on all our telecommunications, where there's internet, phone utilization, and some other items like that. But that's good that that program's out there so we can get some money from that. We also receive other funds, about $350,000 from the MAC, which is the Medicaid Assistance Claiming Program, Administrative Claiming Program. So about $350,000 there, and a few other things that are in there. So local money that we generate is about $93 million is what we're forecasting for next year. The majority of that, again, is the increase in tax dollars, local taxes from our taxpayers. The next page talks about state revenue, and there are different allocations that we receive there. You can see what they're on the screen, the regular ed, special ed, career and tech, and what have you. Those are all determined by, one of them ADA for the regular ed program, how many students do we have showing up every day. And then special ed and the majority of other are by contact hours. Some of them are how many kids do we have in those special settings like a resource or a speech or whatever they may be. And the other ones like career and tech are actual contact hours, how many hours are they spending in the classroom, how many kids do we have, and so forth for all these programs. Now, if you look, I can cover each one of these or answer your questions about any one specific one, but if you look where it says state revenue, kind of a total there, you'll see that we're forecasting about $86.1 million. Well, if you look at the column prior to that, you'll see that this year we received $89 million. So we're losing about $3.6 million. That's the way state funding works. When the higher your tax collections are locally, the more money you're generating locally because of property values, the less money the state's going to give you. And I want to focus on that for a minute because I'm going to come back and talk to you a little bit about the 18-19 school year, which is a year down the road as we kind of think about that. So please keep that in mind. The more value we get locally, the less money we get from the state. And so the TRS on behalf, we increased it a little bit, and that is, for those of you that may not know, that's like the matching Social Security, FICA, that employers do in the private sector. Ours is the state matches our TRS contributions that our teachers do. So that's what it is, and we're required to, as an accounting rule for pension accounting, to show that on our books. So you'll see it as a revenue, and you're going to see that same number on the expense side because we're required to show that as well. So total from the state, $94.8 million is what we're looking at for next school year at this point in time. Federal revenue, we receive impact aid. At one time, that number was $800,000 or so. Now we're down to $250,000. And that impact aid are for families that are connected with any kind of federal program, whether it's the military bases predominantly, it could be a post office, anything that's a federal property. That if the parents work there, we get a little bit of money from them for the students that attend our school district. And the next $3.3 million underneath that, there's ROTC, which we get a little bit of money there. The majority of those funds come from SHARs, which are the services that we provide through our special ed department for students with special needs, whether they're nurses or speech therapy. We're allowed, just like a doctor would ask for the government to pay them for the services, we as a school district provide the services and are allowed to ask the federal government for reimbursement for those services, and they have a standard rate that they reimburse us for. So the majority of that is coming from those programs. Total federal revenue, about $3.5 million. On the expense side, salaries and benefits is, of course, our largest cost for school districts. For next year, just to begin the school year, we're at $155.6 million. And the way that number is derived, if you look at the prior year column in 16-17, and you look at the row that says subtotal salaries and benefits, $154,900,000, it's that number plus any budget amendments we've done this year for any additional employees that we've hired. When you add those together, it's my starting number for salaries and benefits for the next year. Then we have a $2 million placeholder there, again, for the new staff, upgrades and deletions. The majority of those funds are for Veterans Memorial High School. And we will be bringing a list to you on the meeting on the 20th with those positions, showing you all the different positions that we're adding for Veterans Memorial High School, the positions that we're going to be adding for the early college high school program, because we're required to hire somebody to be in charge of that program at each one of our schools. So we're going to hire somebody at Judson High School, at Wagner High School, at Veterans Memorial High School. And so we'll show that information to you. We're also adding the T-STEM program, which is the next year for the J-STEM students that are in the middle school, moving to the high school level. That's going to be at Wagner High School. So we have some cost in for personnel there. And so we'll bring you a detailed list. There's a few custodial positions and things like that. We will bring you a list of those positions that encompass that number. And we're still fine-tuning that. We just had a meeting, I think it was Wednesday of this week, trying to go through that list again and making sure that we were trying to be as conservative as we could with the positions that we're really requesting, because we are kind of not in a good situation with our budget. The question that Dr. Salinas asked a little while ago about the retention incentive, you see it there. It's $1.8 million. This again is the retention incentive that the board approved. I think it was in November or December timeframe. And what that was, that it was $625 per employee. And the rules were that they had to be a full-time employee. They had to be working for the school district as of the end of December, so December 31st, and continue employment with the district through the end of September of 2017. And if they did that, they were entitled to payment of $625 minus taxes and what have you in December of 2017. So that's what that's for. So if you look at that subtotal for the salaries and benefits, we're at $159.4 million. And then the operating cost, the $29 million right beneath that, those are all the numbers that are from all the departments and campuses that were submitted, and we'll review those in just a minute in more detail. So you can see there in that particular line item, compared to last year, we had a $1.9 million increase. And There are some costs there that we've gone back and asked some folks to relook at their budgets. They're doing that now. There are some things that we can and have changed and will be changing, but there are some things that we are not able to change because we are just, those costs are there, we have to pay them. And I'll give you an example. We took out a loan to buy some buses, so $300,000 is due this coming year for principal and interest. So those kind of things we can't change, it's just, they're there that we have to deal with. Then the tiers on behalf, I had mentioned that 8.7 million, that's the offset for the one I talked about a minute ago. So subtotal for the operating cost is 37.7, almost $37.8 million. I'm gonna go on to the next slide, which are kind of, oh yes ma'am. Sure.
You mentioned the early college, the new staff for early college?
Yes, the early college high school program, and I'll start speaking to it, and if I get stuck, I'm going to ask Dr. Cantu for assistance because she's the one who's heading that. The blueprint that TEA has established for the early college high school program that we asked for the designation for has certain requirements. One of the requirements is that we have to hire a early college high school person, and they don't really care what they call the person, but it has to be somebody who's like at an administrator level to be in charge of the entire program. And that individual has to do, any recruiting, working with all the students, monitoring the kids' progress, all that kind of stuff. I'm sorry, yes, ma'am.
Does it have to be one per campus, or can it be one shared? I'm talking about numbers, because I don't know what the numbers look like at each high school for early college. So are we allowed to share that person?
To answer your question, Ms. Salinas, Dr. Salinas, the blueprint requires that we have one person per campus.
Okay. And then, since we have high school allotment, and I think on the slide prior to that, we saw an increase, will that, because I guess this is coming out of 199, I'm guessing, local, the new staff?
Yes, that's correct.
So then would we supplement or use some of the new high school allotment money to pay for those positions? Because it can only be used for college ready, or,
Well, the high
college
school
prep.
allotment, interesting, we've had this conversation, Dr. Cantu was very passionate about that as well. But we've had this discussion because when the high school allotment was originally established, it was supposed to be for trying to come up with programs to get kids to college. That same time, though, when they were doing that, they included and allowed for a lot of different things. They
Correct.
said pretty much you can use it for even students that are at risk of dropping out, doing all kinds of things that you can help them but to answer your question, the money that we receive for the high school allotment in our district is dedicated towards JECA. So even with the funds that we receive right now, it's not sufficient to pay all the costs that we have for all the payroll and everything at JECA. So that's where it's going. Now, if we want to redirect some of these funds and say we're going to pay for those positions, we could do that, but then we're still going to have a shortfall at JECA, and we're going to have to use funds to cover that. So we can designate those funds any particular way we want, but at the end of the day, it's going to be a certain amount of money that we need to, for expenditures. We're going to get only a certain amount of money from the high school allotment, and we're going to have to supplement that to cover
so
the rest of
with
it.
the slide before where we saw an increase in high school allotment?
I'm going to move the slide back. Is that okay?
That's, sure.
Okay.
I'm sorry, it was 2 before. So when we see an increase in high school allotment from the 7 million to 10 million, that's still not enough to run JECA?
No, I'm sorry, that number, the high school allotment money is in there, but you see where it says tier 2 aid and
Yes,
slash, so
yes.
it's not all high school allotment. The high school allotment we receive is only about $2 million.
2?
Yes. The rest of that is other tier 2 funding that we receive from the state. It's not all for the high school allotment.
So it'll be interesting to see if the JECA numbers are going to decrease, because now we have early college at all the other high schools.
We've asked that question, and we've been told that that's not going to happen because the programs are completely different, and they're still going to, their goal is still going to be to recruit the 125 students plus for JECA every single year to make sure that program stays at the level that it is right now.
So Wagner, Veterans, and Judson High School, for high school allotment, then for early, we can't use it for the early college. Everything has to come out of 199.
Yes, and just so that you know, the high school allotment money goes into 199 as well. It's in that
Yes,
same
right.
fund. Right, and you can use it for those positions, but again, if we do that, then we're going to be short, and we already are, because like I said, we don't have
Right.
sufficient funds to fund the entire JECA program. And even now that the Alamo colleges are going to be charging us to send students to them where before they were not charging us, that's going to even require more funds. And so we are going to be, we could use it for that as well. But like I said, there are plenty of expenditures for that are eligible for the high school allotment. And there's just not enough funding there to cover all the expenditures that we have that are eligible for that kind of funds.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. I'm going to skip forward 2 slides to get where we were. Okay, and then I'm going to do one more to get to the next slide. So this is just a total of the revenue and expenditures for the general operating fund. And so you can see that the revenue is at a 191.4 million, and the expenditures are at 197.2 million. So for the 17-18 school year, if we were to adopt the budget we're going to go through in a minute, this is not including any raises, no payroll increases in here at all. Other than the retention incentive, there's no raises in here. We're starting off at 5.6, almost $5.7 million in the red. Okay. Last year's budget is on there as well, so you can compare it to it. We adopted a budget that was $4 million in the red. Now, the reason I'm gonna stop here for a minute to give you pause. When I looked at the budget, I went on the website. I'm not going to say their name, but I went on the website for a neighboring school district, large neighboring school district, to see what they did last school year, because I was curious, because they gave a raise. And so last year, where we adopted, when you look at that $190 million on the 2016-17 budget, and you look at that $4 million negative, well, that's 2% of that $190 million. When I went to look at the neighboring school districts, their budget, instead of being a negative $4 million, it was a negative $16 million. And that was 3% of their expenditures. Of course, they're a lot bigger school district than we are, a lot bigger. And so I looked at their fund balance too, to kind of compare our fund balance with their fund balance. And they're doing a little bit worse than we are in fund balance. Not by a lot, but a little bit worse. And when we reached out this year to that school district and said, hey, I'd like to see what y'all are doing for raises for this year, or actually, I didn't ask them that question. What we said is, we know you had a budget study session with your board on May 30th. We'd like to have the materials from that meeting. And so they said, well, what are you trying to ascertain? And so we said, well, we're trying to determine what kind of a salary increase you all are recommending. And they said, well, we were not recommending a salary increase at that meeting. And at that time, the administration was not going to recommend a salary increase. They were at a negative $7 million in their budget at that time. And the board asked the superintendent to go back and come up with another budget that included a pay increase for their staff. So they, kind of like I, except we have the numbers for the salary increases, they didn't have those, are very concerned. And because when I'm seeing these numbers, it's very alarming to me. I told you, I mentioned to the board that was here last year, I'd never have brought a budget to the board with a negative $4 million deficit. And the worst that we'd ever done, I think, was $1.9 million. And I remember those, I couldn't sleep at that. When this $4 million, I just thought, I don't know what's going on. I can't understand. So we've been doing a lot of reviewing with our programs and saying, what is it? What is it that's causing this? And what it really is just shortage of funds, and that we're increasing the programs that we're providing to our students. All these programs that we talk about, T-STEM, early college, high school, the dual language program, we're talking about moving it to the middle school now to continue it on. They're all great things, but they cost money. And so while I listened to the TASB presentation and know that what they're saying is what we need to do to be competitive with the other districts and make sure that we are providing enough wages for our employees, I'm having a very difficult time reconciling that when I'm seeing these kind of numbers. So there's a couple things that are going to also, that I want to just full disclosure kind of things. As y'all know, in the bond, we had lent $4.4 million to build some athletic fields at Veterans Memorial High School last year, or the year before last. Well, now that the voters approved the bond, once we sell the bonds, we're going to be able to bring that $4.4 million back. So one-time reimbursement, okay? So while it will help us this year, because ostensibly, if we kept the budget the way it was, we can say, we're down to $1.6 million for this year. But again, we have to be mindful that it's a one-time thing. Next year, we're going to be $5.6 million just to start the year. And I want to explain something else that a lot of school districts get themselves in trouble with. The way the state funding works, and I'm going to go back to what I said earlier, has to do with property values.
Mr. Lozano, I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Yes.
We wouldn't be 5.6. We would be 5.6 minus the 1.8 million, because we wouldn't be paying an incentive bonus again. Is that correct?
If for next school year, that is absolutely correct.
So really, it wouldn't be 5.6 in the hole. It would be 4. It's still in the hole.
Yes.
But I just want to make sure we're clear on that.
Absolutely correct. Good point. Absolutely correct. And so when I said earlier that state funding relies on the property values, what they're doing to determine how much we're going to get. That's one of the variables that they use. As long as the school district or the appraisal district is increasing values every year, because what happens is TEA, when they do those funding models or the funding, they're always 1 year behind on property values. Okay, they're always 1 year behind. So right now, they're not thinking we're at $8 billion worth of value. They're doing it based on $7 billion worth of value and change. As long as the property values continue to increase greater than the number that you had the prior year, you're always going to be a little bit ahead in money for local, because the state is going to cut you back a bunch of money, but you're going to make a little bit more local because you're going to get more property value from more property taxes from the local taxpayers, so you'll be a little bit ahead. However, the year in which the property values, that doesn't happen, and either, let's say that for next year, I ran some numbers and said, okay, I'm going to do some forecasts for the 18-19 school year. And I'm going to presume that there's no property value increase at all, which is not realistic. I think there's going to be a little bit of something. But if the reason I just want to make sure, because it is a possibility that whether if it's next year or the year after, at some point, I would like to think, I hate to think, but I know it's going to happen, that the property values are they're going to stop, and we're not going to have these huge increases every year of property values. Well, when that happens, like I said, I did the forecast for 18-19, saying we're going to keep all the same number of students. We're going to keep everything exactly the same, even the property value. We're just going to move it forward 1 more year, and we're going to presume that there's no more property value increase in our local values. We lost $6 million from the state that year. And so that means you're not getting any additional taxes locally to offset that. So that's just hard. $6 million just went out the door. So even if you had adopted a balanced budget the year before, the next year you're $6 million in the hole. So if we adopt a budget that is $5 million or $4 million or whatever the number may be that's in the red, just keep in the back of your mind that there is a possibility that if the property values don't continue to rise at the same level they're rising right now, even if they go up next year 4% compared to the 13% they went up this year, you may not see a $6 million loss from the state, but you're going to see a $4 million loss from the state. And you're going to have to make up for that somehow. And so there's 2 ways that I know of. One is you have to increase your revenue from some other source, and that means going out to the taxpayers and saying, hey, we need to raise our tax rate to $1.17, and you'll have to take your, talk to your conscience and see how you feel about that. 2, you have to cut expenses. And that always means, in our case, unfortunately, it's personnel, because that's where our money's at. So I hate delivering this kind of news, because I really would like to say everybody can do everything, but it's just reality where we're at. And so just please keep that in mind, because I want to make sure that when you make a decision that you know that is, and not for sure, but it's possible that could happen. Now, Dr. Montoya earlier mentioned about the state. We all know they called a special session. I didn't see anything there specifically about giving us any more money right now. They talked about forming a commission to study the funding models and all that. That's for the next biennium. So we already know that for whatever we're stuck with as funding formulas, unless they come back and do something during this special session, it's for this next year and the year after. So it's for 17-18 and 18-19. Those formulas are going to stay in place. Now, they also talked about $1,000 that they said, the governor, in my opinion, said, hey, you school districts, you're wasting your money the way you're spending it right now, so figure out how to reprioritize it so you can give teachers a $1,000 pay increase. Well, that's great. That sounds really good. But in reality, I don't think we're wasting money. And so when they say that, it bothers me, first of all. But secondly, it's not being realistic. It's putting a lot more pressure on the school boards and school districts to find money for that when money's not there. As you can see, it's not there. We're already having an issue. So I know all that sounds terrible, but it's just reality. And I just want to make sure that all of you all understand that. And if you have questions, please, I want to answer them and try to help as much as I can.
Mr. Elizondo.
Yes, sir.
Veterans Memorial High School, I know that last year, that $4 million that we were in the deficit, I believe was attributed to some degree to Veterans Memorial not being at its enrollment projections. I mean, it's a brand new school, you're paying for new positions and so on.
It really, right. It's really not because of enrollment projections, but you're correct in that it is for all the positions that we had to add for that campus, positions that we could not transfer from Judson High School or one of the other high schools.
And so I remember too, we talked about the ADA and the more students that are in the school obviously will increase our revenue. Is this new total in 17-18 kind of having, looking at that enrollment figure for Veterans Memorial?
The ADA number that I talked about initially, about that
Mhm.
22 to 1, that includes all the ADA and all across the entire district. So we don't look at it a campus by campus ADA. We look at it as an entire district for funding purposes.
And the reason I ask is you also mentioned in one of these slides, we're going to have more staff go to Veterans Memorial as well. I think there was a $2 million figure attributed to that. So I would assume then that the administration is studying the capacity to increase their staffing based on enrollment. But I just kind of want to know, when will enrollment be at where we projected it to be at Veterans Memorial? When do we see it just finally, because what do we have? How many kids were this year?
Well, we had about 660 to 680, something in that neighborhood. Majority of them were freshmen. We had a very small class of sophomores.
Next year, we have a junior class. We're bringing a brand-new freshman class.
That's correct. So next year, you'll have,
So
yep.
we should have a full school here in 2 years.
With it, it'll probably take, next year, like you said, this year, we're going to move those. That's very small. It's a very small sophomore class up to juniors. And so then you're right, the new freshmen will come in, which will be a larger class. And then the following year, that junior class that's very small will go to the seniors. So that's 2 more years. And then the third year is when you're actually going to see a full 4 through 12.
9 through
completely,
12.
Right. And that school is being, with the new addition, is being built for a capacity of 2,400 students. I think right now the capacity is at like 1,600 students.
That's correct.
Instructional. And the goal is to build it for 2,400, and our expectation is to get to 2,400.
I guess what I need to know from you is, when we get to 2,400, will that alleviate some of this deficit that we're seeing?
It should. It
Okay.
should. What happens is that too, we need to make sure that we don't keep losing students.
Sure.
Because if we continue to lose students in elementary levels or anywhere else, while that school may be staffed proper, we're going to have an issue there. Now, when we lose students, we can correct for that, because we don't need additional staff if we're losing students. If the ratios fall right, because we have to make sure that we have the 22 to 1 or 24 to 1, so we have to lose them in certain areas. Otherwise, you have to keep the teacher. But typically, we don't always know that, and even at that time when the contracts have already been issued to teachers and the numbers come in later, there's usually like a 1-year lag by the time we actually know we've lost the kiddos to actually being able to do something about the staff. Now, HR has really done a great job this year, because in the leveling process at the beginning of the school year, we started seeing a little bit of those issues, and instead of trying, in the past, what we used to do is come back to the board and say, we need to hire new teachers, or we would just do it because it was part of the staffing formulas that we had. This year, they looked and actually made some people upset, but what we had to do is part of the leveling process is move teachers from one campus to the other. They may not even be going to the same grade level, but that's what we did to make sure that we didn't have teachers in elementary classrooms that had a very low teacher-to-student ratio, and one that was over here across the district had a very high student-to-teacher ratio. So that helped in saving funds by not having to hire additional staff. It was just the right thing to do. And so, to answer your question, yes, specifically at Veterans Memorial, once we hit that number, it'll help with that, as long as we don't continue to lose kids elsewhere.
Well, and that's good. I just wanted to make sure, because I remember that $4 million was, a great deal of that was because of the expansion of our new schools.
Correct.
You also mentioned about tax increases to 117, but is there an opportunity to increase it to, say, 108? We don't have to go for all 117.
You definitely don't. You can do it to anything that you want. The folks that do this, though, that come out and visit with school districts and do models, however, they recommend that if you're going to do it, you do it all the way. But you don't have to. You can do whatever the board thinks is appropriate to do.
Thank you.
Sure. And one of the things I was going to mention, to put more stress, is that on the 18-19 school year, we're going to open 2 elementary schools. And so, right, so we need more staff that year for the 2 elementary schools. Now, some of the teaching staff, depending, we're able to transfer teaching staff, but we're still going to need administrative staff, the librarians, right, all the custodians, all those positions, right? So when we open elementary schools, it ranges more like in the $1 million to $1 to $1.5 million per school to get all the other staff that we can't transfer. So that is going to be coming in that year as well.
Well, I do want to say that we have the data. We have a forecast of what is going to happen. So as we plan the next couple of years, we keep that in mind. And obviously, we're not going to be able to pay the type of raises that I'm hopeful we'll pay this year based on projections. So it might be time to look at things like workplace satisfaction. What's keeping our employees here? Because at the end of the day, raises are intended for thanking our employees, but it's also to keep them in their positions.
Sure.
If we can't afford to pay them because we have noticeable issues with our budget here, then we need to look at other enhancements that will keep employees happy and in the district. So professional development, which is, we've mentioned this a few times, to start gathering that strategic process and say, okay, we're going to offer this to our employees. And once we do that, we may be able to still keep the loyal employee in our district, even if we can't give maybe just a 1% increase, or maybe we can't give any. But those are things that we can start planning for now so that we can keep them here.
Definitely. Now, I will tell you one thing that's on the positive side. I hate, and I shouldn't, but I will.
News.
We do have a healthy fund balance. So in the general operating fund, we're anticipating that by the time we finish the 16-17 school year and the auditors come in and we do all the entries we have to do, we'll probably end up, and I hate to give such a large range, but anywhere between $41 to $44 million in our savings account, if you will. The target that the board has established by policy is 17% of our expenditures. So that number is around $35 million based on the new budget. So we have a little bit of space, a little bit of room there, but the only caution is that when we do something this significant, it will eat that up real quick. Now, if you're doing $1 million, it's going to last a long time before you get to that point. But if you're doing, $6-8 million in the red, it's going to eat that up in a year or two. And then you're going to have some really drastic decisions to make at that point in time.
Now, is that $41 million figure including that 4.4 that we're getting back?
No, that's
so
just
that's you're already
17.
assuming may already be spent. So that sounds really good.
Yeah, it gives a little bit, but like I said, I'm throwing it out there, but just with a huge caution that money unfortunately goes real fast. Okay, as y'all already know.
Just members of the board, just a comment in some meetings I've been at literally in the last couple of months with some superintendents. Their issue in their district is they do want to give a raise. The issue is, do they go to the property owners to go up to the 117 per 100 on property value? And then on the bad end, several of the district administrators said, well, maybe we could give a 3-4% raise, but in 2 years, we put a plan in place to, and I'll use the phrase, riff staff, because that may be what's coming. You can give a good raise, probably get away for 2 years, but in 2 years, you will be riffing staff, including teachers and administrators. And so there's some issues out there that we need to be aware of, as Mr. Elizondo has hit from several angles.
Before we look at the fund balance, we got to remember this. If we take $4 million out of our fund balance this year, we're going to take $4 million every year afterwards. So as far as the fund balance goes, I don't even consider it. That's there for emergencies, things like breakdowns during the year. So looking at the fund balance ain't an option as far as I'm concerned.
Thank you. Mr. Elizondo, for those of us who are new to the board, there are some other questions that I have, because frankly I don't remember so over the years. I know that we have some property that is commercial property that we have tax rebates, tax abatements, and so forth on. Can you kind of help me understand what we're looking at down the line when some of those might come on board? For example, the new IKEA that's coming on board, and I think also, don't we have the Marriott and maybe the golf course in Olympia Hills, that I think we've had all those done?
And you're correct. Those properties do have tax abatements, but not from the school district. We have never in our history granted anybody tax abatement. So municipalities might, like the city of Live Oak might have done it, or somebody else, or the county, but not the school district. We have never done that. Sure. You bet. Do I keep going? Anybody have any questions? Okay. All right, the next ones are a little bit easier to cover. The child nutrition funds, as you know, this particular program in our school district is self-supporting. So that means it pays for itself, and we don't ever have to transfer money over there. We've never have in the past 30 years that I've been here almost. For this program, there are districts that do have to transfer money to their child nutrition program because they spend more than they bring in. That's never been our case. As a matter of fact, in our district, we've had just the opposite issue, that we've had too much money in fund balance, and the federal government, because we get such a great deal of funding from them for the free and reduced lunch program and breakfast, they only allow you to have a maximum of 3 months worth of operating costs. So for the past few number of years, we've been purposefully spending down that fund balance. And even here in a minute, I'm going to show you, there's a little bit here. It's not anything major anymore. There were years when we were trying to spend it down by $500,000 to $1 million. So here, I'm just going to just do the highlights real quick. Total revenue, and if you have any questions, I'll be happy to cover it. It's the same information that was in the board book. For the Child Nutrition Fund, it's $12.8 million at the bottom of the page there. And then on the expenditure side, total expenditures are at $13 million. And like I said, this fund pays for it, the program pays for itself. So the summary of both of these, it shows you that we're looking at about $125,000 going into their fund balance a little bit for the year. They always do really good about not truly doing that by the end of the year when they finish their program, but that's what the budget would look like for them at this point in time. And again, and I'm going to go back a minute here. They also have in this number a retention incentive in there of $93,750. So if we decided that we're going to do something different with that and provide a raise and pull back on the retention incentive, then of course that number would be used towards a raise instead of towards a retention incentive. The next fund that we have to budget for, there are 3 funds that we do: General Operating Fund, Child Nutrition Fund, and the Debt Service Fund. This fund is the fund that we use to pay the principal and interest payments on all the bonds that we have outstanding. On the revenue side, you can see again our largest number that we have there is current year taxes. Again, our taxpayers are paying that in their tax bills, which is 33.5, almost $33.6 million. So we have a little bit other money that we receive there. So we also receive money from the state, about $967,000, which is almost $1 million, to help us with those debt service payments. So all in all, we receive about $34.1 million in revenue for the debt service fund. And on the expense side, it's going to be about the same. This particular fund, the rules are that you only generate enough revenue to pay for the expenditures. So last year, for this particular fund, our tax rate for the debt service fund, I hope I'm not going to give you the wrong number. I think it was 42 cents. I think it was 42 cents. And so based on the increase in property value, our tax rate's actually going to go down for this fund to 39 cents. So the taxpayer will see a decrease in their tax rate because of that. Now, for full disclosure purposes, that doesn't mean that they're going to be paying less taxes. And that's because they're typically, if they're like everybody else, their appraised values went up. And so unless they have their homes that are, over 65, that their taxes are frozen. But if that's not the case and their values went up, so they will be paying a little more money. But that's why we bring the tax rate down, because we're just trying to collect enough to pay the bills and not trying to get more money than we should from them. So as a whole, when you look at it in summary, you can see that in red, we're going to be short about $14,000, but we have plenty of fund balance in that fund to cover that. That's not anything of any concern to us. Okay, now these next sheets that I'm going to show you were also included in your board book, and these are a little bit more showing you by campus and department what we're allocating for each campus to spend and each department to spend. These numbers do not include payroll costs. They're only for their operations, from buying paper clips to anything else that they need for that school, but they do not include any payroll costs. So for campuses, what we do for schools is we give them a per student allocation, and they're a little different for elementary, middle school, and high schools. And then what happens is at the end, once we do our PEIMS snapshot, because we forecast how many students they're going to have, once we do our PEIMS numbers in October, we will go back and reevaluate how many students we projected at each one of the campuses versus how many kids actually showed up, and then we will make an adjustment if we shorted them money. If we gave them too much money, then we will not take money away from them because they've already planned on those funds, and we're not going to take it away. But if we shorted them, we will give them the additional funds. And what we do to project is we typically use the numbers that they have this current year in enrollment. So we don't typically give anybody too much more money than they should be getting. They may get a little bit, but it's not anything major. So for the schools, this particular slide shows Judson High School, shows all the high schools, Judson High School being the first one. And you'll see there's a column, second column at the end of the right there where it says proposed 2017-2018 budget. And you'll see that it is a little bit of a decrease. And again, that's adjusting for the students that are going to be going to Veterans Memorial High School. Because they're, I think I don't know the exact number, but it's over 400 students that are going to be moving to Veterans Memorial. And so you can kind of keep going through each one. I'm not going to go through each one of the campuses, but kind of just see what we're doing there with how much money they're being given. And there's, of course, a variance column at the very end, and that should kind of tell you if they're getting more money or less money than they did in the prior year. And those numbers on the variance column are comparing original budget to original budget. So sometimes we'll amend for some reason in the middle, and we don't want that to skew what we're presenting to you. So the numbers that is being shown at the variance at the last column is only original budget last year to original budget this year, what they're asking for, or what we've allocated. So for the high schools in total, you can see that we're proposing that we give them, yes, I'm sorry.
I had a quick question. So is it a common driver used for all, like say all elementary schools get the same per student allotment?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, all elementary
So there's
school-
no adjustment if the school is like struggling with student achievement, that they get a little more to, okay.
Okay. Not in this budget. So we have, right.
It's a different type of funding. Okay.
Exactly. They will get some other funding for that, but it's not in this particular budget.
Okay. Thank you.
Sure. The middle schools, same scenario. We have just to kind of show you the budgets that are there for 17-18 for all the middle schools and some of the projects that are at the middle schools. We are having a little bit of a discussion there at the very bottom. You'll see where it says the STEM project, and it really is for Judson Middle School, JSTEM. And we're visiting with them about how they're doing some of their projects and determining whether they should continue doing what they're doing now, because it is a little bit of an expensive process that they use because of the way they do their projects, or if there's a better way to do that to kind of cut them back a little bit. But we also want to make sure those kids continue to get the experience they need to be successful in that program. So we're going to continue to evaluate that a little bit, see what we can do with that. The elementary schools, same situation. These numbers, there's not very much we really talk about. It's just so many kids, so much money per student, based on if you're in elementary, middle school, or high school, and we just give them the number, and then they work with their site-based committees to determine how they're going to distribute those funds on their campus. They turn it into us, we put it in the budget module, and then they get to spend it in that manner. Elementary's continued. All in all, for the elementary schools, we're at about $1 million is what we give them for all the elementary schools combined. Okay, this is where it gets to be a little more interesting. These are the department budgets. And so what happens here is we ask each department to go look at their needs for the next school year and to, as much as possible, use what's called zero-based budgeting. In other words, start developing your budget from nothing to what you need for the next year. And so some of these, when you're looking at the amendment column that's in here, you'll see some significant changes as compared to the original budget, and some of those will be for encumbrances like purchase orders that we had outstanding at the last prior year, and they were not paid for because the items didn't come in by the end of the year, so we have to move those forward. And so what happens when we do that, we also move the budget money forward to cover those expenses. And we only do that for larger items, so if somebody just waited till the last minute to order some $100 item or $200 item, then they're just going to take it out of their next year's budget. We don't move their budget forward for that. All right, so these are broken down kind of by, we couldn't put everything on one slide, obviously, because it's just way too much information. But this is the Board of Trustees budget, and as you can tell, there are there are 3 budgets in here. The school board, which is the one that y'all use for all the different things that y'all do, and that's being members of TASB is the biggest expense there, and then your travel budgets and things like that, but the largest expense is the TASB membership. Then internal audit. The board on occasion wants to do special reviews of programs or areas, and so we allocate $40,000 there, so when the board wants to do that, there's funds there for that. And then the election costs, last year, as you can see, we budgeted $115,000. This coming year, we're not having any elections for board members, so we were able to recoup that for this next year, so there's $115,000 that you saved already. And that's because the board a few years ago decided that we were going to have longer term for the boards, and so that helps because that saves money in the long run. It's pretty significant too. I'm gonna start reviewing these, and at some point, if you want me to stop or whatever, you can let me know, but these budgets, the proposed column 1718, when we get to the next departments, we're still working with everybody, again, because we all saw where we're at, total bottom line in that deficit number, trying to go back and say, is there anything you can delay that you don't absolutely need for next year? So we can try to free up as many funds as we can, so that y'all can evaluate whether you want to do the raise or not. And under the superintendent's area, of course, he has his budget, the first line item there. Then the largest expense here are the legal fees that y'all know we hire attorneys quite a bit when we need them. And so we start off with a $350,000 budget for the year, and then we determine, whether we need more during the year, and if we do, we come to the board and ask for more money if that's necessary. And that number just depends on how many issues, as y'all know, if we have grievances or anything like that, how many things we have to get it. We try not to involve attorneys if we can handle it ourselves, but once the other side involves an attorney, then we have no choice but to get legal involved as well. We do put some money in there for that effective practices, NUIL competitions. Some of those things, sometimes our superintendent will visit or go somewhere and see something that some other school district's doing that's just a really great idea, and he wants to pilot it at one of our schools. So there's a little bit of money for him to say, okay, I want to pilot this at this school so we can see how that works out. And also when our schools go to UIL competitions and they don't have enough money, because we don't give them enough money for that, truthfully, then they'll come to the superintendent and say, hey, I need to do this. Do you have a little bit of funds that you can help us with? And then he has a discretion of using that if he thinks that it merits it. And then the police department, of course, is a large expense as well. We have, I think, 28 officers now, something like that. So it does take quite a bit of money for fuel and everything else to run a department of police department. So that is under the superintendent's supervision as well. The government relations, Jeff, we have a new individual in charge of this program. We did do some combining here. We had, as you can see, last year the budget was $19,300. Now it's at $30,000 requested for next year. The substantial increase in here, and what accounts for most of it, is that we had a budget for something that's called it's for the parent extravaganza that we do the, gosh, I can't think of the right term right now, but anyway, I'm sorry? No, it's the one where we have, usually sometimes it's at Metzger, but we have invite all the parents to come, and we do a lot of different booths for them and helping. So that budget was in a separate area, and she's in charge of that responsibility now, so we moved those funds over to her. So even though it seems like there's an increase there, there really isn't. I mean, I think her increase was like $1,000 or $1,200 total when you consider moving that other budget in there. This is our budget. I'm going to keep on going. No, I'm just kidding. The tax office, first line item there, you'll see that the number is $631,000, and you're probably asking why we're going to close the office. Well, the reason for that is because the Bear Appraisal District has to charge for appraising all the properties. And the way they do it is they charge every taxing entity in Bear County their prorated share of how much of the budget to operate the Bear Appraisal District. So that number, that $631,000, with the exception of maybe $20,000, is for that purpose, to pay all that money, goes to the Bear Appraisal District for their operation. The print shop mailroom, I mean, you can see that they had purchased a truck last year. This year they don't need one anymore, obviously, so you see a reduction there in their budget. Purchasing went down a little bit. We try to tell individuals if they could cut their budget 10% when we initially send everything out to try to help, because we knew kind of what was going to happen. In some cases it's possible, some cases it's not. Employee services, that's the department that pays for a lot of our the benefits that we have for our employees. So they pay for different things like our Section 125 administration, for our annuity administration, things like that. And those are the major expenses in that particular budget. There are $60,000 approximately of that $104,000 goes to pay for all those services. On the other one, it says insurance, $650,000. That's insurance for the entire district for all of our buildings. So that's just last year you can see we didn't spend quite that much. It was $546,000, so we had a little bit of a balance, like $100,000. But that's one of those items that we just don't know until the insurance companies gives us the quote. I could drop it by $100,000, but I may have to come back to the board and say I need it again because the premiums are higher. I'm anticipating, based on all the hail damage that we had, that we're going to be charged higher premiums, and I don't even know if that $100,000 is going to be enough to cover it. We'll have to wait and see what it comes up with. The warehouse, I'm not gonna go through all those. The repayment of the bus loans, I mentioned a minute ago, there's a huge difference there, $351,000. Again, that's the first payment that's coming up this year for both the principal and the interest for that bus loan. It's a 5-year payment, so this is the first year, and we'll have 4 more to do after that. And I'm not gonna keep going through all of these. I'm gonna just hit some of the highlights, because if not, we'll be here till 1 o'clock in the morning doing this. So I'm just gonna go through the ones that have a larger variance, and if you have any comments, please stop me, or if you see something else you have a question about. And like I said, this information is also in your board book. It's laid out a little bit differently in your board book, but it's the same information. Student support services, here, again, you'll see that they did cut their budget overall by about $30,000 compared to what they requested last year. I'm gonna keep going. Okay, so if I go too fast, let me know. Communications department, we spoke to them, and we identified an item there that's gonna cut that budget almost in half. So the next time you'll see it, it'll be greatly reduced. Operations, the ones here that I'm gonna focus on, you'll see that athletic department, they reduced their budget by about $135,000 to this point. The original, it was a little bit higher this past year because of Veterans Memorial. They needed some startup things, and now they were able to bring it down now that that's been done. The buildings and grounds, you can see there's an increase there right now of $398,000. We're revisiting with them as well. We met with them today, as a matter of fact, and we're going to continue to visit to see if we can do if we can kind of wedge it down a little bit more, if there's not negotiable, and we'll see how that works out. But the next one that looks like it's a little bit larger is towards the bottom there, the $90,000, but that's for energy management, for paying for all of our utilities. And here again, what happens is we added, the more we start opening up Veterans Memorial, then it starts getting a little bit more expensive, and the rates are just going up. The water rates are just increasing like crazy, and so it requires more funds to do that. We are going to look at, as a matter of fact, I had a conversation with Dr. Fields this afternoon. We are going to look at the way we're setting our set points on the HVAC systems. We changed them, I think, last year or the year before, and it's costing us a little bit more money to do that. And we did that because it's hot for the custodians to work in the evenings once everybody has left the campuses. So we try to make the schools cooler, but it's costing us several $100,000 to do that. So we're trying to see if there's a better way, maybe even during the summer, that we can do something a little bit different to where it still gives them a safe, comfortable environment to work in, but maybe we can do a little something with that AC and kind of cut those costs down a little bit. Custodial services, you see an increase there of $83,000. Again, we're just more schools opening up. We just need, things are getting a little more expensive, as y'all know, so they need a little bit more money to operate. And they're also buying a few pieces of equipment to replace some worn out equipment that we have right now, hopefully to make that a little more efficient operation too. Human resources, Mr. Garcia said, hey, 10%, sure, I can do it. So that's what he cut. He cut his $159,000, his portion there. And that's weird because I need to update that variance column. It doesn't show the number there. So he did cut it by $20,000. I didn't give you credit. Sorry, Marco. But I did it out loud. Post-secondary education. Again, I'm just going to focus on some of the larger variances. The STEM Academy specialist. Again, we're revisiting with the folks, the CAP members that are in charge of these budgets, to go back and review these. I know that they've talked about already, there's a few things they can do a little different that would help us cut those numbers down a little bit more. So the next time we meet on the 20th, you'll see an updated list, hopefully with numbers a little bit lower in some of the areas. And then at that point, if you still have concerns, you can definitely share with us. Post-secondary education is a continuation, same area. The first two items on here on top are the ones that we talked about earlier. I know the very first one, I've been told that they have reevaluated how they're going to do some of the equipment and furniture for that program, so that number is going to come down pretty significantly. We'll see. We're supposed to meet next week to discuss that, to finish that discussion. Early college, high school, you'll see that and this is just full disclosure again, as y'all know, early college, high school, for the new high schools, we're barely starting the, I guess, second year, but first true year, because last year we only did it in the spring and we didn't get charged last year. These fees are starting now for Allen community colleges, and so that number is going to continue to grow every year as well. By the time we get through a full 9th through 12th grade, all 4 grade levels, going through all these classes, it's going to get a little more expensive. Not a little more expensive, I'm lying. It's going to get a lot more expensive because not only is it just to pay for what Alamo Community College is charging us, but also to pay for all the books and instructional materials for a lot more students. Now, we do have a cap, so we do have a little bit of a control as to how many kids we're allowing every year to be in the program. It's not like everybody can do it, and we're going to all of a sudden have 3,000 or 4,000 students doing it. Well, while that would be great, it would be something that we could not afford. So we're concerned about this, but we will be, we're working as it is with Dr. Cantu to provide a pro forma for the board to kind of show you in 4 years what the program is going to be costing, so the board has a better understanding of what those full costs are going to be, based on the current rates that Alamo Community Colleges has in place. I'm going to keep on going. On the next slide, I don't see any really major variances there. On this one, there's 141,000 in desktop services. They're trying, as you all know, they're doing a lot of computer refreshes at the campuses. The bond money only covers certain computer refreshes, and they're doing a little bit beyond that to try to get to some other areas that was not in the bond. So that's what accounts for that, the majority of that $141,000 there. Summer school, there's nothing really here in special programs that's major. Curriculum, I'm just gonna hit the larger numbers there. The $63,000 on textbooks. Again, this is just additional cost for early college high schools. It just is expensive to buy the textbooks. In the MOUs, though, they did try to work with the college to see if we could use those books for several semesters, so it's not you use it for one semester, you got to buy new ones again. So hopefully, they're saying they're going to do that, so hopefully we'll just see in practice what happens, but the MOU calls for that. And I don't see anything really, really huge here. And here there are some pretty, there's some, the iStation, there's some $93,000 there of an increase. And we're looking at that as well to see why that why the cost for iStation went up that much. We're not sure, we're trying to identify if it was an IMA. We use another funding source to pay for some iStations, or if that's was transferred over here, or if there's another reason for it, or if we can bring that back down a little bit. And as you can see as well here, there's some other reductions there. Keep going.
On your AVID program, the slide before, what's it's a decrease or increase? I was looking at it real quickly, sixth grade.
That is a decrease of that much money, of 104,000. So Dr. Cantu, who's doing AVID, would you all speak to that a little bit, please?
Yes, as we looked at the AVID program that is currently in place, we have it at the middle school, and it is being utilized by one grade level. The intent of AVID is that it rolls with the students and it builds college readiness. So one of the things that we are evaluating is this, if we're going to implement a program, we need to implement it with fidelity. And then we need to evaluate the cost and the return that we get. So we're looking at how do we make sure that we offer college readiness, but it is an opportunity for all students instead of just one grade level. So we're looking at the return that we're getting, and can we use that funding, provide to all students what they need at a better cost. So at this time, we're evaluating AVID as this is a program that we're going to continue, and if we do, we need to implement it with fidelity.
I appreciate that. A little history, I guess, in 2011 or 2010, this was one of the first programs I remember being really upset about having to cut, but the board had to make some decisions to cut AVID. But at the end of the day, one of the rationales for that was that it wasn't implemented appropriately, and there was some issues with it. And so we've started this just a couple years ago, right, or last year? How long has this program been in? About 2 years. So I'm hearing again that we still need to look at the program. So I guess we'll be able to assess everything going forward and implement that.
This is the program that was under the CNI, and as now we have the post-secondary office, Ms. Hernandez and I are collaborating and started looking at this funding because, first of all, when we saw the budget and saw AVID, there was some discussion as where is it implemented, what grade levels, how many students, what's the return that we're getting. And so there was a lot of questions, and as we dug a little deeper, we were able to identify that there are some problems with the program.
Okay, well, thank you.
Yes, sir.
I'm going to keep going. So it's a continuation of that same department, and actually that's it. I think that's it. Yeah, that's it. So I'll be happy to entertain any questions y'all have, but I am going to ask for a few things, if you don't mind. If y'all would please visit with Dr. Montoya when y'all can, and give us a little bit of a guidance on a couple of things. You've seen that we're at about a little over $5 million deficit right now. While we're going to work to make that improve on that number, I'm going to tell you it's not going to be a great improvement. We're still going to be in the $4.5 to $5 million range, if not still in that same range we're at right now. So one of the things that I'd like for y'all to please visit with him on is what your feelings are about raises, if we want to continue moving down that road, and if so, you saw 3 different models from TASB. If you can maybe mention to him what model you'd like us to kind of put in the budget. If there are some modifications that, I know one of the board members shared, if you all have some modifications that you would like to see some different numbers on, so that we can ask TASB to do that for us. There is no model in there for a 1% raise. We did a 2, 3, and 3.5. And after the adjustments, you saw that 3 turned into 3.5, and the 4.5 turned into I forget the numbers exactly, but actually in reality they're higher for not everybody, but people who are getting adjustments would be getting a higher raise than that. So if you, for example, said, Dr. Montoya, we'd like to see what a 1% will do, or we'd like to see what a 1.5 or a 2, whatever number you guys, whatever y'all would like, just please share with him so we can prepare that information for y'all. If you all feel like, hey, we're already at 5, and we can't afford to do that, then please share that with him. So we kind of have an idea. Our next meeting is on the 20th, and so we can come better prepared with what we're going to present to the board, so that we can continue to move this process forward, because we're going to have the public hearing on the budget on the 22nd and adopt the budget that same night after that hearing. So we need to continue to move forward as quickly as we can to get to where we need to arrive at. Just the things that we discussed about, just as a summary, we are going to be receiving $4.4 million once we sell those bonds this year, which will help. As we all mentioned, it's a one-time thing, so just also please keep that in mind. If you all have any questions, please ask. You can ask me now, or if not, please let Dr. Montoya know, and we will get some answers for you. Thank you.
We will now move to closed session. Oh, I'm sorry, yes.
I thought you were raising your hand to ask a question. My apologies. Supplemental budget, substitute budgets. Did I miss them? I probably did, because we went through it quickly, but are they in here?
No, they're not individually. When we looked at the payroll costs, like the $156 million, they're embedded, they're included in those numbers.
So
all the sub costs, also middle pay is included in there.
Do we have a ballpark on what that might look like? Is it $1 million? Is it 1.2,
It's
1.5?
more than that. It's more than
Yeah.
that. The sub costs alone are almost $2 million.
$2 million?
Right.
Okay, and then supplemental?
I'd have to go back and pull that number. I don't want to give you the wrong information.
And so we
I'm
would
sorry.
see that then on the next round of discussion?
We don't, we never bring that detail to the board, the budget in that far of a detail, but if you have questions, we can happily share that with you. We just never present it to that level, to that, that granular of a level.
The reason I'm asking too is because I'd like to see what our supplemental pay is actually paying for, get a better understanding of that. And then also look at our substitute dollars. I know that we're paying a high amount of substitute pay, which means there's teachers that are not in the classroom for whatever reasons. And so I'd like to break that down. I guess eventually I'd like to even look at revisiting an incentive for perfect attendance for our teachers, for our staff, for our nurses, our librarians, and hopefully incentivize some of that in some way. I don't know. It's just a thought. But without some sort of program, I don't know, we need to kind of look at that and kind of identify why we're spending so much on substitutes. Thank you.
Thank you. We'll now move into closed session. The board will now adjourn into closed session pursuant to the following sections of the Texas Open Meetings Act: 551.074, discussing personnel or to hear complaints against personnel. No final action, decision, or vote shall be taken while the board is in closed session, and the time is 8:19.